Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to the Fellowship Factors ICL. My name is Ashwin Rao. I wanted to introduce the panel of people here who are speaking with me today. Our panelists are really an awesome group of program directors or associate program directors from across the various disciplines in sports medicine. And so our goal and sort of my goal as we started thinking about this session was to really try to help inform you on how best to think about preparing for sports med fellowship, and particularly how to get into fellowship. That's a question that a lot of people have, especially early in their careers. And I imagine that a large group of you are thinking about, well, what do I need to do to prepare for interview season as I'm getting ready for this? And a number of you are maybe earlier in your careers and trying to figure out, hey, what do I need to do during my residency or even before to kind of be ready for this next step? So I'm going to start with my introduction. My name is Ashwin Rao. I'm the program director at the University of Washington. We're a sports medicine program, primarily academic in nature. We work with our Husky athletes, and we have two fellows, one that will typically train in family medicine or internal medicine, and the other track that is a pediatric track. So that is me, and I'm going to go ahead and let the rest of the group, I'm going to start with Siobhan. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you. My name is Siobhan Statuta. I am the program director at the University of Virginia. Our fellowship is housed within the family medicine department, but we are pretty classically open to all the other venues of training. So in particular, we have taken a lot of PM&R residents. We have one spot a year, and that's us.
Awesome. Stu, do you want to go next?
Sure. My name's Stuart Willick. I'm the program director at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City. We go through our division of family and preventive medicine, but we're a very transdisciplinary fellowship. We're housed within the University of Utah Orthopedic Center, and we have multiple community clinics that we work through. We take 4 fellows a year, one from emergency medicine, one from family medicine, one from PM&R, and the 4th slot rotates based on various factors. Our core faculty come from all areas: pediatrics, internal medicine, family medicine, PM&R. Hope I'm not forgetting one of the 5. And we work, of course, very closely with the orthopedists and their orthopedic sports medicine fellowship. So it's a very transdisciplinary, academic-based fellowship. It's a ton of event coverage, strong didactics, and tons of clinical exposure, except for right now.
Awesome. Thanks, Stu. Suze, do you want to go next?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Ashwin. I'm Sussanah Briskin. I'm a program director at University Hospital Sports Medicine Institute. We're actually a pediatric-based program through Rainbow Babies and Children's Hospital. But over the last 5 to 10 years, we've really expanded. We are multidisciplinary, much like Stuart. We've got faculty from family medicine, ER, and pediatrics. And then the interesting thing about our program is we are also osteopathic track credentialed. So we now have 4 slots a year, and we usually take a blend of osteopathic track as well as traditional. And our program is also academic in nature. We have a ton of coverage, everything from youth sports up through Cleveland Browns and semi-pro hockey, as well as D1, 2, and 3 coverage. So it's an in-depth fellowship. The interesting thing is we are PEDS-based, but we do accept people from all the disciplines. With the exception of PM&R, we don't have the ability to train at this point.
All right, thanks, Suze. And Anna?
Yeah, hi. So I am Anna Waterbrook. I am the Associate Program Director for the Sports Medicine Fellowship here in Tucson, Arizona through the University of Arizona. I am emergency medicine based. And interestingly, you can see everybody's fellowship is created a little bit differently. We are bureaucratically sort of through the family and community medicine department. However, we take 1 family medicine and currently 2 emergency medicine fellows per year. That's purely a funding issue at this point, but we've not been able to get funding through other departments here. So it's 1 family medicine and 2 emergency medicine fellows each year. And like the other folks talked about, wide range of event coverage, everything from high school and youth sports up through, NCAA Division I, and some pro coverage as well.
Fantastic. Thanks, Anna. So as I mentioned, the point of this talk is to introduce you to the application process to some degree in preparation for that process. But really, the talk is pertinent to any resident or even somebody before residency who's thinking about careers in sports medicine and how to prepare yourself. As you can imagine, there's a number of different pathways to get there. Those of you who are in residency and who are preparing probably understand that it's, as you hear, pediatrics, family medicine, physical medicine and rehabilitation, emergency medicine, and internal medicine are all viable paths by which to pursue sports medicine. That being said, there are different numbers of programs per discipline that house the different fellowships. My program is a family med program, and as you've heard, there's a wide variety of different programs out here. But there's no one prescribed path to get you there, and I think that's important. And so the session itself, this is the second time we've done this session, and the whole point of this session was to present data initially that myself, I was a co-author on a study that was addressing and trying to identify fellowships that impact entrance into sports medicine fellowships. So essentially things that might help you, that you can look at, read this paper and try to understand, hey, how can I best prepare to be a fellow, or at least to prepare to apply to fellowships? And so sort of a peek behind the curtain, so as you may, to kind of understand how to best do that. And so we published a study, and I'm going to present a slide set. My hope is that slide set takes about 5 to 10 minutes to go through, to give you an overview of what that research showed. So that research really is evidence-based, as best as we can get the evidence at the time we did it a couple years ago. But I'm also following that session with a Q&A. And so if you guys look at your screens, you'll see an option for chatting and for question and answer. My hope is that you would ask questions through the Q&A directed at any specific one of us or the whole group. It doesn't really matter. And what we'll do is I'll try to keep track of that, those questions as they come up, and pose those questions that you've typed in to our panel here, so that we can do our best job at answering your questions. We have about an hour and 10 minutes from right now to do that. And so I know that you guys tend to be a little shy, but hopefully under the wall of the internet, you'll feel less shy to answer questions. But I have some general questions prepared should that shyness prevail. But don't be shy. Feel free to answer all those questions. And periodically, I'm going to have Andy Meyer from AMSSM put up the slide set now, and you'll hear me cueing him forward. So I apologize for that. The system is just a little different that way. So we'll go ahead and, Andy, can you go ahead and put up the slides now? So hopefully that's going up. It looks like we're going up. All right, and so I think everybody can see that slide set. So the topic here being sports med fellowships. How do I get in? None of us have any disclosures, nor do our family members. So moving on, so what it takes. What does it take to be a sports med fellow? That's a great question. Obviously there's the general principles of what it takes academically. You obviously have to get through high school, or hopefully get through high school, proceed through college and medical school, and then go essentially through a residency program before you can enter fellowship. So hopefully pretty much everybody on this webinar is aware of that, has gone through much of this, so pretty obvious. Go ahead and forward, Andy. So one of the challenges that I'm sure many of you are facing is, how do I find time? So go ahead and click forward. So, obviously, how do I find to do volunteer sports coverage? Does that mean covering a team or two? Does it mean covering events? Do I need to be invested in research or scholarship to prepare myself to be a fellow? Who do I find as a mentor? How do I even seek mentors if my program has or does not have a sports med program affiliated? What about lectures? Do I need to give lectures? If so, do I need to do those regionally, nationally, locally? These are all questions that you guys might have or are pursuing. And oh, by the way, I got to study for step 3. I got to get ready for my residency boards, be board certified. And during all of that, try to find time for sleep. So good luck to you guys. I'm glad you're doing it and not me anymore. But anyways, the idea behind the study was to help try to facilitate some of the answers to those questions, and ultimately to identify the factors associated with acceptance into primary care sports medicine fellowships. If you're interested in an orthopedic sports med fellowship, you're in the wrong talk. But primary care sports med fellowships are essentially the fellowships that are training people who are in those various disciplines we already talked about, who the panel is about. And that's a group of people we're hoping to inform in terms of how to prepare. So we basically, as a group of authors, did a survey back in 2018 targeting primary care fellowship, sports med fellowship directors and faculty regarding their preferences for accepting applicants into their programs. So the idea being like, hey, if I'm going to ask you what your interests are or what do you value in looking at a candidate as an applicant to my program, what are those factors? And we did a bunch of weighted means and calculated detail for the numbers that we had. So go ahead, Andy, move forward there. So you might imagine we had the panel of people we were looking at were all AMSSM full associate and active members. So that's 2,300 members. Not all of them are fellowship faculty, obviously. Of that group, about 10% responded because we were really trying to target and not miss anybody. So we got about 10% of those individuals who responded, or 242, represented essentially 175 of that 242 were fellowship directors, and the remaining were fellowship faculty. So that response rate is about 42% of the overall number of program directors who could have responded. So we had about close to, over a third and less than a half of all fellowships represented in this data set. And you can see the breakdown of the different disciplines of people, a large number of family med programs, as you might imagine. For those of you who are not aware, the majority of programs still to this day are represented or housed in family medicine departments. But you can see the breakdown there. PM&R has become an increasingly popular choice for housing family med programs. Pediatric med peds programs, internal med, and emergency med all have programs that are housed in their departments. So we were able to get that representation. And one of the questions we had as we went through our numbers was this group of, can you back up, Andy? Was the numbers in our study reflective of the overall percentage of programs out there? So if you can look at these numbers, it's a bit of a jumble there, but the idea is that if you look at the percentage of respondents to our survey and compare them to the overall represented group, our numbers are pretty comparable as to what you might imagine the average program director across each of these disciplines might answer. So we were hoping we had a representative sample. So, all right, go ahead and move forward. So as you can see, there are a wide variety of questions. This is kind of a cluttered slide, but we're going to break this down further future. And so what we did is that we came up with a number of factors, and we did that by surveying and preparing and talking with a number of program directors as to what factors we should be asking about. Was it the interview? Was it letters of recommendation from faculty in sports medicine? What about game or event coverage, prior longitudinal team physician coverage, things like scholarship, pre-participation evaluation, research, personal statements, what background they happen to come from. So sometimes people may be concerned, hey, I'm an emergency room, or emergency department or emergency medicine resident. Because there are less programs, am I at a selective disadvantage? Or what does that matter? How does that factor in? And so we tried to kind of get to all of these different questions using this group. And we surveyed fellowship directors from every discipline. And this is essentially the data we came up with. And you can see the numbers there. We rated each factor from a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 representing the highest value, specifically, how often a program director would value that number highly. And Andy, can you move to the next slide? So I highlighted in red here the 3 most popular answers, or the 3 highest rated factors for all responses. So the interview, it turns out, specifically communication, personality, and professionalism as part of that interview was the most important factor in determining entrance into sports medicine fellowships. So hopefully that you understand that. So basically, as you're preparing for fellowship, it appears that if you are able to interview well or to develop interview skills, that seems to be the most important factor to get into fellowship. Beyond that, the next most valued factor was a letter of recommendation from a sports medicine or musculoskeletal faculty member. The idea being that as you apply, you're going to be asked to submit either 3 or 4 letters of recommendation. One of them has to be from your residency director, but the others are essentially up to you. And so as you prepare, it appears that the letter of recommendation from a sports medicine or MSK faculty is quite important. And then ultimately, sports medicine event coverage and game experience, also very important. in considering entrance into fellowship, which kind of makes sense if you might imagine being prepared to cover events is a good prerequisite to fellowship. And then you can see a number of other factors rated top to bottom in terms of value. Oh, you can go ahead and go forward, Andy. So let's focus a little bit and break details down a little bit more. So the factors most valued by fellowship directors compared to faculty, the interview appears to be the most important and most valued by both fellowship directors and non-fellowship directors. Letters of recommendation are second in both cases, and sports med and event game coverage, the same. One difference to highlight here is board scores, and specifically a history of board failures. So I know in a large enough group that is attending here, there's going to be a few of you who may have failed one of your steps of your boards. And then by no means is that an absolute to not getting into fellowship, but certainly it appears that fellowship directors voted that factor a little bit higher than non-fellowship directors. And some of that might have to do with accreditation. As a fellowship director, each of us has to consider that we're able to graduate and successfully have our fellows pass the board. So you might imagine that if there's a history of board failures, that might have made some fellowship directors answering the survey a little bit skittish. So, okay, go ahead and move forward. So what about factors least important? So what it appears in, Andy, can you click one more forward? I think there's oh, sorry, go ahead and go back. So it appears that, least important factors by both fellowship directors and non-fellowship directors, interestingly, by fellowship directors in general, do not value prerequisite musculoskeletal ultrasound experience during residency. Now, as you might know and probably have experienced as people who are thinking about sports medicine, a lot of you are coming into contact and experiencing the joys of using musculoskeletal ultrasound to aid in diagnosis and treatment. But it turns out that fellowship directors don't strongly value that as a prerequisite training, meaning that you don't have to be prepared to walk in the door to a fellowship training for having had some training in ultrasound. The other things that are less valuable are your residency background. It does not appear that your specific training background matters all that much to a fellowship director or a faculty non-director in terms of getting into programs. So I would let that rest aside a little bit. So next slide. If we look at this, now this slide basically breaks down by discipline. So this is a slide where if you're a family medicine or PM&R or peds or emergency medicine or internal med candidate, you may say, well, if I'm applying to this type of program, a PM&R program, what's the most important factor? And so we rated that by discipline. And as you can see here again, the interview comes out on top every time. Go ahead and click again, Andy. Next up, letters of recommendation, pretty much in every discipline except for pediatrics where it falls a little bit. It remains in the top 3. Go ahead and click again. Sports and event coverage seems to show up every time again here as something important to be involved with as you prepare for training. And then click again. Different disciplines, I just think, have different importances. So a couple different disciplines value board scores a little bit more than others. So you can see the breakdown here. And then I think that's it. Go ahead and click forward one more time. Yeah, so, and then prior longitudinal experience also shows up for a couple disciplines. And this slide breaks down the opposite end of the pile. What were the least valued responses, meaning the ones that were not thought to be all that important. And again, background here, and interestingly, musculoskeletal ultrasound experience kind of shows up across a number of disciplines. So go ahead and march forward. So that was the basic idea. So the take-home message before we get to Q&A is you should probably be practicing your interview skills. Try to make sure that you're ready for that interview. And we can talk about that, get into that more in the Q&A. Next up, make sure to try to secure a letter of recommendation from a sports medicine physician. You hopefully have had a chance to have a sports medicine mentor as you've prepared yourself. So if you feel comfortable with somebody representing you and your skill set and what you are capable of in fellowship or where your future is headed, that should be the person you ask. You want to ultimately ask people who are most familiar with you, but hopefully one of those people is a sports medicine physician and you should ask them. And next up, be nice to pass your board. So try to do that. Focus on step 3. You got one more chance for some of you guys, and definitely do as best of a job as you can on your boards. And then ultimately try to cover events, sports, teams, all of those different activities along the way. It's hard to do that as a resident, especially in some of the disciplines where internal med or inpatient heavy. But if you have a chance to cover sporting events and do so longitudinally, that will benefit you as you prepare for fellowship. So that is the slide set. I think that might be it. One more slide, maybe, Andy, just to, yep, that's it. Okay, perfect. So we're going to go back to our roundtable now. And I'm going to try to look at some Q&As here, see if we got
Yeah,
anything.
I started going through them when you were talking, Ashwin. So I started publishing some because they're getting redundant. So people can hop on and upvote them. So we're not getting
perfect. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you.
a ton of redundant questions.
So I'll go ahead and actually, do you want to take the first question, Suze? If we'll kind of start, we'll get this party started.
Which one are you looking at?
Okay, so I'll actually read it out. It's the one that was upvoted most. There were 37 votes. Thanks for doing this. I've all programs I have contacted are not doing any auditions because of COVID. Do you have a suggestion on how to show interest in programs if we are trying to match this year without this opportunity?
Yeah, I think everybody's going to be in the same boat, fortunately. I think a lot of people won't be able to do audition rotations, so I don't think it's going to be anything that's held against people. I think the best bet is to proceed with everything else the best you can. If there's any way to set up a rotation for a month where we're hoping sports is back and moving again, such as August or September, I think that's everybody's best bet. I think this is going to be one of those wait and watch and see what happens things. And I don't think audition opportunities are going to exist like they have in the past.
I will say that my program is still having audition rotations. We've actually already filled our panel for the year, I believe. We have 5 rotators, but that's a moving target. We may have to pull back on that if our GME decides that they can't do that. But we're offering them for now and moving forward as such. I think my answer to that would be to consider trying to set up some sort of virtual talk or interview to just discuss. If you're that interested in the program, I don't think that any of us would feel particularly worried about having somebody reach out to us to have a conversation either by phone or by video chat. So anybody else?
Or even email, just reaching out directly and showing interest is totally acceptable.
Totally. And I really like that. All right, well, let's go to the next question here. So this is from Kimia. Thanks for holding this talk. Due to COVID, I've heard, let me just make sure. Due to COVID, I'm concerned how many spots will be available for the 2021-22 year and after. How are fellowship directors planning for this? So a lot of COVID questions. Do any of you have a good answer to that question? I can answer.
I'll jump in. I don't have a great answer to that question. I can tell you that so far we have not even considered that here at the University of Arizona. Our fellows are all still planning to come, and you know, we're talking about some sort of alternative educational activities and, you know, ways to still make it a good year. Unfortunately, I feel like with all things COVID, right, we're all in this totally new territory. You guys don't know what, there's not a guide for you guys applying. There's not a guide for us as, you know, program directors on how to handle this. And, you know, I think we're all sort of being fluid and changing with the times and making the best of it.
So to the residents out there, applying to programs, whether it's medical school or residency or fellowship or looking for a job, can be anxiety provoking. And of course, the uncertainties now can make it more anxiety provoking. It's really important to understand and accept and acknowledge the uncertainties. And that'll give you a little bit, hopefully less of a sense of anxiety. You're all in the same boat. With regard to away rotations at our program, that's never really been a deciding factor for anybody for the most part. The majority of fellows we take have not rotated with us. At the University of Utah, we're not planning any changes as of now for the next academic year or the academic year after that, but we're certainly following the numbers very closely. Will things be different? Things will probably be different in terms of the international sports and pro sports we cover and collegiate sports we cover because of the travel. But so far, our number of hospitalizations have been relatively low. Number of deaths have been relatively low. So we're sitting tight and following the numbers day by day. And hopefully we'll be able to carry on our fellowship at near normal capacity. But again, it all depends on how well our community practices good social distancing.
Thank you. Thank you. A couple people had asked about trying to prepare yourself in the setting of, I want to kind of get the COVID questions out of the way because there's quite a few about trying to prepare yourself to cover events, knowing that there's less events to cover and what else to do. That has been a question of how to get experience in this setting of coronavirus. I can certainly tackle that first, but I want to give somebody else a chance to answer. Siobhan, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm happy to tackle that one. I agree with what everybody else has said. I really like the words that Stu said about how this is anxiety provoking for everyone. Instead of, just trying to survive this, I've kind of tried to give the attitude of like, let's thrive in this. Like, let's think outside the box. So our learners, I'm trying to get them to think about, hey, okay, I'm limited to this space. What can we do? So watching injuries online, let's talk about it. I mean, some of those things I even have to like look away from, the slow motion ankle fracture, that kind of thing is like so nauseating to watch over and over. But we talk about, okay, what's been affected, what bones, how would you, so talking through that. Also, and to understand that COVID is so regional, it doesn't affect the entire United States equally as a whole. Different regions are experiencing different levels of surges. And so we too here in Charlottesville, Virginia, we have a relatively low surge level at this point. And so our learners have the opportunity, more time outside of the clinic setting, where they can tackle projects such as preparing talks, encouraging them to practice giving the talk to a small group first, and then maybe putting it out onto one of these larger platforms so that it can be seen nationwide. And also tackling chapters. Writing is a wonderful thing to be working on right now because there's more time to focus and hone in on those skills. So those are just a few things that I'm thinking about on our end.
I also think about, on the AMSSM end, there's a lot of online learning opportunities. And, I certainly have had people apply to my program and they list, I've completed the AMSSM musculoskeletal ultrasound curriculum, or I've, completed the interpretation of EKGs. And, even just documenting that you've read, the articles in the Bank of 120. I think anything you can do online that shows that you're engaged and interested and committed to the field is going to be super important, because even as fellowship directors, we're going to have to, change our gauges for our expectations for what the next round or two of applicants is going to, have achieved during their times where they're limited just as much as we are.
The lack of event coverage is not going to hurt anybody right now. Nobody's doing any event coverage.
Correct.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think I really look at, how can you be innovative and how can you be resilient in this situation? I think that those are traits that all of us fellowship directors value in our fellows. All of us have had to pivot in one way or the other and trying to figure out how to harness what we have available to us. For example, there's been a real kind of blossoming of the online educational resources that are being developed and are available. So there's, in any sort of tragedy or sort of difficult circumstance, each of you have the opportunity to think a little bit out of the box. And if you develop and own something that's novel, that benefits other people, it's something that you can talk about with excitement during the interview. And I think that would be something that will benefit you. So I think thinking out of the box, trying to follow, look for different resources. If you can't find them, maybe work to develop them. Talk to your own local sports medicine faculty members about what's available and what projects might need to be worked on. And that'll give you some opportunities to grow despite the challenges ahead.
I think too, from a fellowship director standpoint, that would tell us, it would not only benefit you, but it tells us what your nature is like. It tells us that you are so motivated. This is not just a mandatory vacation. Yes, feel free to binge watch, but also be productive. And and that, I think, would be the underlying message that I would walk away from. I would say, wow, I cannot believe this person knocked all this out or had the initiative to do this. So that's telling us the type of person that you are. And that's what we're trying to piece apart when looking through these applications.
So there, going to a new question, there was questions about whether or not we would consider doing virtual interviews during this application cycle. Do any of you guys have thoughts on that?
All
I
options
think
on the table. It's going to depend on which direction the numbers are going in come fall.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't think any of us know that either. What we've talked about here is, planning to be able to do interviews as usual. And, when the fall comes, we'll reevaluate. And if needed, we can convert to this online forum. I don't know that any of us really know right now.
Next question from Stephanie Lefebvre. Does it matter if the letter of recommendation, that's a sports med letter of recommendation, is from a primary care sports medicine physician? She mentions that at her program, her sports medicine curriculum is entirely through orthopedic surgery. So do any of you have thoughts on that?
Go for it, Siobhan.
Yeah, to me, it doesn't matter. I have my own personal experience. Everybody has different experiences. Before I went to medical school, I worked in sports medicine with orthopedic surgeons. So I was assured, I knew that they could write me great letters, and that's what I came to understand. Now that I work in primary care, sports medicine, I don't have a preference. Ideally, if you could get one from primary care, one from ortho, yeah, that would be amazing. As long as they take the time to write you a good letter, a thorough letter. What I found is, and I hate to make blanket statements, but several orthopedic sports medicine letters of recommendation tend to be on the shorter side because they're busy and they're dictating notes or running between cases or whatnot. So if you feel strongly that that person knows you well and can write you a good letter, go for it. Totally go for it. So to me, it doesn't push me one way or the other as long as it's a good letter.
I would agree. I would say that whenever I advise applicants, I'd say make sure that when you ask for a letter, ask if that person can write you a favorable letter of recommendation.
Yes.
And you can also, in this situation, say, hey, the letters that are preferred in primary care sports medicine, if that letter is not from a primary care sports doc, should reflect me a little bit more detail. Give me, maybe you'll give them your CV so that they can review the CV and make sure they're representing you well. But they should also you don't want your CV just regurgitated on a letter of recommendation, because I can read your CV. I read every single applicant's CV and every letter. It's better if somebody knows you, from my standpoint, a little bit and can reflect upon you as a candidate and to the strength of your candidacy. What are your strengths? What are their, so I can get another perspective that's not just your personal statement and not just your CV. It's good to have that extra opinion. And I will actually contact, if I have a question, I'll contact the letter writers and talk to them.
I agree. And Ashwin, I did see kind of in the chain of questions, somebody had asked even about getting a letter of recommendation from an athletic trainer.
Yeah.
I think that kind of goes along the lines of this question. For me, I like to see kind of the core 3 letters being from people who know you well, who are physicians. But if you have an option for sending in a 4th, having a 4th from an athletic trainer is totally acceptable to me, because part of what we do is working with people who are athletic trainers, and we work with coaches and athletes and parents, and athletic trainers see people in a different setting than physicians do. But it gets back to the core, which you and Siobhan mentioned, which is they need to know you well as a person and how well you function and what your qualities are.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I totally agree with that. I think what's more important is how well they know you and how strong of a letter they can write you, rather than whether or not they're sports medicine orthopedics versus primary care.
Perfect. So there's another question about how important it is where an applicant is from. And I sort of looked at a few different questions. One was how, is it beneficial to be an internal candidate versus to be from somewhere else? I think, Stu, you answered that a little bit, but I'd like to get the group's opinion on internal candidacy, meaning that the person is at the residency that houses the fellowship versus from somewhere else? Do people have thoughts on the strength of candidacy based on where you're from? There's also some questions about foreign medical graduates that might be worth discussing in this context as well.
We try to get the best that we can, regardless of where they're from.
I was going to say, were you a good resident or a bad resident?
Yeah, it's from my standpoint, yeah, like I think all of us want the best fit for our programs, and keep in mind that different programs have different fits, and just like you as a candidate are going to fit differently with every program. Our specific program is pretty academic. We focus on the care of Division I athletes. We like to train people who might go on to be team physicians, academic sports medicine docs. But if you're interested in being a proceduralist at a community practice, that might not be a great fit for us and may not be a great fit for you. It may be burdensome to do scholarship and research at a higher level. It may be cumbersome to be at events all of the time. So I think you have to find these fits for yourself. And so to that end, as Stu mentioned, I'm really hoping for the best candidate for my program. I want to see that whoever's applying, once I get to the interview, I want to make sure that they've actually thought about my program a little bit, done some research. I have everything on my website so that if somebody is really interested in my program, they will have read that website and I'll know pretty quick. So I think it's important to develop your own application cycle around where you're interested in, and we're looking for the best candidates, and that may not be internal, external. Of my 7 fellows, 6 have been outside and 1 has been internal, just as an example. Awesome. So there's another question in terms of, I think this is an interesting question from Beatrice, who's incoming family med at my program at UW. Was asking about the dynamic between a sports medicine fellow, athletic trainers, and say an intern, and what should that look like during game coverage and shadowing? Like essentially what role should the resident take in the situation where there's multiple different providers present? Do any of you have thoughts on that? I can comment, but I want to give.
I can take a stab at that. I'm not sure I understand the question 100%, but it depends on the situation. In general, let's say you're at a high school football game. Here, it's going to be the fellow and the trainer, or the fellow and 2 trainers, or the fellow plus a resident and a trainer. Typically, for injuries that seem mild or mild to moderate, the trainers, we consider them first line, and they go see the athlete first, and we'll often look on and make sure everything seems to be okay. But we rely on the trainers, who are outstanding, to grab us if they need us. If things are starting to get into the moderate plus category in terms of severity of injury, then the fellow gets involved early. And it's much different at a University of Utah football game, where you have 2 sports attendings, an orthopedist and a non-orthopedist, and then you have like 2 or 3 or 4 other attendings, an orthopedic sports fellow and a non-orthopedic sports fellow, and 7 trainers and cameras, lights, action. And then the fellow is not first line or second line, but they're certainly observing or how things are done in that setting. If we're covering an extreme event, there's always an attending present, and depending on the extreme nature of the sport, sometimes we just assign one of our emergency medicine attendings to that, plus the fellow. So it all depends on the situation, but we do certainly try to give our fellows increasing responsibility throughout the year. And we certainly kind of throw them into the fire even from the get-go with high schools and some community events. And there's always an attending for backup.
I'm going to answer in a slightly different way. As a resident or somebody earlier in your career, I think there's a sort of a process of sort of mentorship that happens when you're just starting to get your coverage. So oftentimes as an intern, most of what you're doing is shadowing maybe a senior resident who's been covering that team for a year or 2, and I think that that's appropriate. There may be later in the season where the senior is pulled off to some inpatient rotation where you get a little bit more responsibility. And in many instances, those athletic trainers are going to be far more seasoned at sideline medicine than you are. They may have been at it for a decade or 2. So you can rely upon them. It's like being in the hospital and relying on your nurses who really know everything about what's going on, and just use your resources there, make sure you kind of understand things. But your goal is to learn, but also to be the medical advisor in certain situations where you may need to be called upon for, a splenic lac or a fractured humerus or something like that, which you may be called to do. So I think there's this process of mentorship that happens, but rely on the resources and the experience that's part of the team that you're part of. So.
Yeah, and I
Also,
would say I think it highly depends on what you're covering, kind of to put together what both Ashwin and Stu talked about. I mean, I think it depends on what type of sport, what level of sport it is. And I think, good communication at all times before the event is really important. What is the athletic trainer's role? What is the fellow's role? What is your role as a resident? Because you really don't, you're mostly there to learn and observe, and you can find ways to be helpful without sort of getting in the way. But sports medicine operates sort of different than how things operate in the hospital. And I think if you're new to it, just getting an idea of how things are running and have people get to know you and know what you can do and what you can't do. And I think depending on your level of training, how much you're around, all of those things you take all those things into consideration, and you may be able to, sort of get more involved as time goes on.
So don't be afraid to ask at every event. If you walk in, talk to the attending and say, hey, this is my level of training. Can you just give me a quick rundown as to if the quarterback goes down, am I the one walking out there? Or, just ask. That is so helpful for us to be like, okay, wow, somebody has that sense, that forethought to understand there are going to be different degrees and they're not going to be the cowboy running out. So that's very helpful to have that communication, just like Dr. Waterbrook mentioned.
So there were a couple questions that I thought were interesting about the value of both teaching and research that came up. Edwin and Cameron have asked specifically about how much that is valued and how important that is as part of residency preparation, teaching and research. So any thoughts on that? All right, I'll give a thought. Academic program. So obviously teaching and research are important to me. I wanted to, if the way I look at it is that whatever phase of life you're in is just preparation for the next phase. If you think of any of these things as endpoints, that's not really the case. And so for me, residency is preparation for fellowship, which is preparation for your career. But if you're in a career of academic medicine, you're always giving talks. You're always on some research project. You're always doing something like that. And so for a program like mine, doing teaching and research, I'm looking for those things. I'm looking for somebody who's had longitudinal demonstration of like, hey, I'm an invested teacher. I've been doing this many, many years now, at least through residency and maybe even in their med school years, demonstrating some level of interest in teaching and scholarship, because it'll facilitate that person to be successful within my program. That being said, other members of the panel might have different answers, but that's sort of how I feel for our program, but that may not be a universal.
Oh, it's certainly not universal. Different programs value teaching and research differently. Some don't put it very high on their list of things. We here at the University of Utah, although there is some difference in the different core faculty about where they value teaching and research versus other factors, in general, that is something we're valuing very highly when we evaluate applicants.
I think it's definitely program variable. I mean, I'm at an academic institute also, and to me, I look at it more as icing on the cake. It shows initiative if you've either managed to work on or develop a research program, or if you've been able to engage in teaching. We often have people apply to our program who've set up full didactic sessions for other residents or medical students at their institute, or they've organized a whole longitudinal rotation, which then gets set at their institute that other people can follow. And things like that just show a lot of initiative. But for me, the factors all kind of bear out along the same lines as Ashwin's initial slide presentation. I view those interview moments and letters of recommendation as the most important, and any experience people have above and beyond that is icing on the cake. Or you could look at it as, adding points to the strength of your application. It certainly doesn't hurt. But if you don't have the ability to, produce research or to teach other people, it probably is not going to hinder you terribly.
Perfect. There's a few questions about the value of primary care training for disciplines that are a little less primary care, like PM&R, and specifically what type of experience needs to be acquired for somebody who may not be prepared for the primary care aspects of sports medicine. I don't know if any of you guys have an answer for that.
I'll take a stab at that, Ashwin. So with the nature of our program, our fellows come in with different skill sets. The emergency medicine fellows come in better at handling emergencies, and the family medicine fellows come in better at handling dermatologic issues in athletes and other primary care issues. The PM&R fellows tend to come in stronger in the musculoskeletal care and ultrasound and some other things. And we view it as our job to bring us all up to the same level. So we make a special focus on bringing the PM&R fellows up to speed with their medical skills, bringing the family medicine fellows up to speed with their MSK skills, radiology skills, things like that. So we recognize that no matter what, the fellows are going to come in with different backgrounds, different skill sets. Our job is still the same, to get everyone to the highest level we possibly can. And we all learn from each other.
Another talk, I think that's a great answer, Stu. Another question I think is, how many programs do you recommend applying to? It's a question I get a lot, but I was curious what your guys' thoughts were.
I think that's a tough question.
Actually, you broke up. I couldn't quite hear this.
Oh, sorry.
How many programs should you consider applying to? So I think that's a tough question. I think geography and days off limit a lot of people. And, certainly if you've gone through the process once and you didn't match, which is also a common theme along the Q&A chain here, I think you need to expand your search. You can apply to lots of programs and then always turn down interviews. So that's the other thing, applying broadly to places that you're interested in, I don't think hurts you, as long as you're applying to places that you'd actually consider wanting to go down the road, or think places that make sense geographically. So we're all limited on our end for how many people we can interview. We can't interview an unlimited number of people. So I always tell people, please don't apply unless you'd really consider moving here and doing training here for a year. But I don't think it's unreasonable to think about applying to programs in high numbers, 15 or 20. If you're somebody who's gone unmatched, even applying more. Or if you feel like you have a weaker application because maybe you're somebody who decided late in the process, or because of the COVID situation, you feel like your application isn't strong. I think applying to a higher number is reasonable. You just have to be smart about where you're applying and considering geography and cost for travel, unless we're all virtual.
Yeah. Yeah, and that'll be an interesting situation for, I think, us as program directors, is how to do these interviews this year. There may be a situation where we do some number of these virtually, which may allow us to interview more people. I really don't know, but I think that in terms of, in general, how I would answer that question is, I think it really depends on how confident you are in your application. I tell people to make sure to pick out a number of programs of different levels of interest. There may be a few shoot for your stars programs that you guys decide to apply to. I would put almost any of our programs as in that level, but the truth of the matter is, there's a number of amazing programs out there for every one of you candidates, and different programs are of different quality for different people. And so I would, whatever your definition of shoots for the stars were, I would say, hey, pick several of those programs, several that are in the middle, maybe not quite as well of a fit, and several that may be more, less interesting to you, just to provide some level of diversity there. And most of you will find too many programs to be interested in and try to have a tough time paring it down. Some people do that geographically. Some people do that based off of life circumstance or other factors. But just know that I think that you should consider a wide variety of programs, or if you're really set on one specific type of program, like an academic program, and then focus on those groups, depending on what your preparation is. So
fully agree.
Okay, let me go to another question. What are common, this has been upvoted a lot, what are common questions you as a program director like to ask during your interview? 23 votes, folks.
I ask all the time why they picked our program to apply to. I think it's super important. You have to, come into the interview process prepared, much like Ashwin said. I have a very thorough website, which I happen to model off of Ashwin's website because it was so excellent. And I expect people to show up prepared. And I want an answer to, why us? What are you, what attracted you to our program more than anything else, probably. I don't really care if people have a vision. I oftentimes will ask, what do you see yourself doing 5 years down the road? But I don't put a whole lot of weight into whether or not somebody has a answer in concrete or whether or not they're still in the deciding process.
Welcome back, Anna.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, it's okay. The question that we're currently on is what common questions you as a program director like to ask during interviews. Do you have any thoughts on questions you like to ask?
Give away my secret.
Exactly.
I don't have any prescribed questions. The way we do it at our place is, we just kind of ask questions to get to know them at first, and that'll just depend on sort of what the applicants have done before. And then we split up the questions by faculty so that we're not all asking the same question. So for example, one of us will ask about their, sports coverage. I usually ask folks about either prior research that they've done or their research interests, because that's part of the fellowship that I'm mostly in charge of is our fellows research experience. And so you don't necessarily have to have a background in research. We've taken some fellows who love research, and it doesn't have to be your primary goal, but just, showing that you've had some thought about things you might, like to do in fellowship is helpful.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, I'm gonna go to the personal statement. Any tips for drafting a good personal statements? And what do you guys like to see in your personal statements?
I can start.
You. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I can start out with this one. I'm pretty passionate about the personal statement, and this might come across as very harsh. If there is a grammatical mistake, spelling mistake, I close the application and I put it away. It is, to me, it is unacceptable, particularly this day and age, particularly if you are passionate about sports medicine and want to get into this, it's just not acceptable. So I understand I'm coming off as very harsh, but that's just a peeve of mine. Besides that, I like some sort of personal aspect where I can finish reading the personal statement and have an understanding as to how that applicant reached where they were, what drew them into sports, and particularly their where they want to go with it, what general direction they want to go. When I finish reading a personal statement and I'm like, wow, okay, I get it. They came from this background. These were the hurdles they had to overcome. And this is the type of practice that they can envision themselves having, or some just general, like it can be as vague as I want to be, I love teaching. I see myself in an academic institution and research gets me pumped up versus, I want to be a strong proceduralist. These help me figure out whether this applicant is going to be a good fit for our program, because it's not you guys just trying to get in with us. It's us having a program that is going to let you, like, we want there to be a symbiotic relationship. We want to create the best form of you. And so we want to make sure that we're meeting your needs. And so when I'm done with the application, reading the personal statement, if I feel like we're a good fit, that I think is what I look for in a good personal statement. I don't know if that made things any clearer.
I think one of the things that I look for is an explanation of a unique situation also. So if somebody took time off their training, I look for an explanation as to why. If they had a board failure that they want to explain, I've had people apply who've had legal issues along the way. It's an opportunity to explain anything that may come across as a red flag in an application. And then for me, I'm looking for talking points for our interview. I have to spend 20 to 30 minutes talking to a complete stranger over the interview time. So it is nice to be able to pick up a couple points that we can connect on when we sit down face to face. And then I look for people to stay away from anything controversial. I don't see the personal statement as an opportunity to discuss political or religious beliefs. This is all about, your opportunity to discuss why you're passionate about our field and why you want to go in and study it. And for people who, start bringing in other aspects of their life, I think it detracts from what you should be trying to communicate about yourself.
And from my perspective, the personal statement is important, but it's often the story that we want to tell about yourself. So you're one chance to personalize a little piece of yourself in the entire application. Otherwise, it's letter writers talking about you, a CV documenting your various things, or your board scores, or whatever else you include in there, scholarship, those types of things. So this is your chance to talk about yourself in a personal way. One thing that I really like to say, and I'm with Siobhan about grammatical errors, they drive me kind of bonkers. So please double and triple check, and just use the little spell check deal on MS, whatever, Google, whatever. But at the end of the day, the thing that I actually like the most is to see what one's goals for their career are.
Yeah.
And I like to say, hey, well, at the end of this, do I have a sense for what this person's goals for fellowship and beyond? What are those goals? So I think that that's really important to kind of add to the equation for a letter.
And the personal statements that actually address that, my goal for fellowship, or I'm looking for a fellowship with ABC, that can be that's what I'm looking for. That's a very important piece to the puzzle, I believe.
Yeah,
Perfect.
I agree. I mean, I feel like it's how you can highlight everything and bring it together. It's kind of your why and your unique perspective on that. I can look at the list on your CV, I can look at the letter writers, but this is your voice. And so I really think you need to, make it authentically you, and tie the important things together, and why you've done all these things along the way, and what you see why you want to do the fellowship, what you see yourself doing in the future. And I also agree, typos that are glaring drive me nuts. My mom was a college English professor, so I'm kind of primed that way. And then I also agree with any red flags on your application. That is a time to discuss them, and don't shy away from them. Because we are going to see them. So it's better to
And I think we might be losing there.
I'll jump in while we're waiting for Anna's internet to catch up to her. I'll echo a lot of what's been said. In addition to typos, have somebody proofread, or have more than one person proofread your letter. It's easy to do, and it makes sense for grammar and content. Don't make it too long, because the letter readers, us, read scores or hundreds a year and thousands over the course of the career. So keep it to 1 page or less, and 1 page may have a different meaning now in the digital age. It's also very hard to write an excellent personal statement, because you want to grab the reader's attention. That's important, but you don't want to sound over the top. So things that are too kind of commonplace. So we read a lot of letters. I'm going to give a silly example. When I was in 8th grade, I sprained my ankle playing lacrosse, and I worked with a physical therapist, and then I wanted to go into sports medicine. We all sprained our ankles. Everyone hurt this or that or the other thing. So nothing too blasé and not over the top. Sometimes somebody starts their personal statement, it was the bottom of the ninth. There were 2 outs. The bases were loaded. I was sweating.
Yeah.
Blah, blah. And yeah, we're all sports fans. We all can relate to that, but not necessarily in a personal statement. I value the personal statement very highly, as do others. And I also, in the personal statement and during interview, I try to get information about what your professional aspirations are.
Perfect. So we got about 15 more minutes. If any of you guys want to stay on longer, I certainly can stay on, but I want to respect everybody's time. And I want to get through a few more questions. One that's been highly voted up has been the talk of moving to a 2-year fellowship. And how do you think this will be implemented based off of the session that went through earlier today? That was from Martic. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I used to run a 2-year fellowship. Our fellowship was 2 years for the majority of its existence. We just converted down to a 1-year about 2 years ago because of funding issues, as well as the switch over from AOA accreditation to ACGME with osteopathic track. I was on the fellowship forum this morning, and it sounds like the timeline would be this next group of fellows who are potentially interviewing in the fall would come in and do a standard 1 year, but potentially the folks then starting the following year. I think, Ashwin, wasn't it 2022? They were talking about potentially being the first year where people would go through.
Talk. For the way my understanding is how this would work is so there's essentially a proposal that's being developed by a presidential task force led by Tracy Ray. And that presidential task force will ultimately submit that proposal to the ACGME to review. Then that review will go through at least 2 comment periods, during which time there will be discussions made both externally and internally about the proposal, and that it's either voted up or voted down, is my understanding. So I think the soonest it would happen would be 2 years. But
that was my understanding. Yeah. I mean, I've lived now through both iterations of our fellowship program, and I think there are a lot of positives about being a 2-year program. The reality is, even when I trained, I saw like 19 concussion patients in a year, and now I see 19 concussion patients in 2 days. And there's just been, a massive expansion of knowledge that we have to put into place as primary care sports medicine docs. Musculoskeletal ultrasound barely existed when I did fellowship. So we're looking at having to train, fellows in 365 days, not including their vacation time, on aspects of sports medicine that didn't really exist or need covered within training years ago when the credentialing process started. I think there are negatives to it because I think implementing it in certain places will be a challenge from a funding perspective. But I truly believe that 2 years allows for a better trained person coming out of fellowship, as well as for people who are interested in academics. It really gives you an opportunity to dive in and participate in scholarly work at a much greater level than within a 1-year training program. I think it is the future. I think it's the way the field is headed. I think it's just a matter of time before it's actually implemented.
Yeah, one of the challenges that we have as program directors is try to fit all of this content. It could be everything from concussion care to, all the different aspects of musculoskeletal ultrasound, both diagnostic and procedural, sports cardiology, adult wellness, exercise medicine. These are all areas where we've kind of grown into to inhabit niches, and it's essentially impossible to do that in 1 year. That being said, there's a number of issues that need to be confronted and dealt with to make a program 2-year in terms of funding and all those different things that kind of come with that. And so there's a lot to be decided between now and 2022. I think it's in the future. I would be shocked if it's not in the future, but how we go about doing it and then with timeline is still, I think, entirely up in the air. So I think we'll leave it at that. So I'm going to get to the next question from Carl. In light of the upcoming fellowship fair, what are some important factors to consider in evaluating fellowship programs? So I can start with this, and then I'll let you guys take over. From my standpoint, it's is this a program opposed or unopposed? Meaning, is there, how many different types of fellowship programs? Is there an orthopedic sports medicine program competing with a primary care sports med program? And if so, what does that look like? Is this a fact, are the fellows covering Division 1, 2, 3, whatever sports, high school sports, and what is their involvement at that level? What type of independence might go into training? Like, do I have my own panel of patients in sports medicine, or am I seeing my attendings patients, and how would that work? Either way, what type of supervision is in place for the various different experiences? Those are all important. What are my scholarship requirements? Like, am I expected to present at AMSSM, or am I expected to run a QI project? Because both of those could be considered scholarship. So there's a number of different factors from my standpoint that would be determinants for you to consider. I would like to hear from others though. So Anna, you were off for a little while, so I'm going to give you a shot to. Do you have any thoughts on factors that
okay.
considered?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. Sorry. I think it's just my internet going in and out. I'm not sure. Anyway, yeah. What I usually tell our applicants and people who ask me these very questions is that, certainly if you want to be a proceduralist, you want to do all MSK ultrasounds, then of course you need to go to a place that is strong in that. If your goal is to be an NCAA, head team doc, then go to a place that has that. But apart from that, I think it's really important to just get a broad range of exposure, because you may not, there's so many different aspects to what we do. You may fall in love with something you had never even thought of before. There's no way you can get all the exposure prior to actually going into sports medicine. So I always say look for a place that has coverage at multiple levels, high school, collegiate, pro, intramural, etc. And also ideally someplace that has, regardless of where the fellowship is actually housed, a place that you have a broad range of exposure to different attendings, ped sports medicine, EM sports medicine, family medicine, sports medicine, etc. And that has several faculty, just, like you do in residency. Not every attending practice is the same. And it's, obviously true in sports medicine. So I think just really trying to find a place that gives you a well-rounded experience. And then, of course, the fit and feel, right? That's why we do the interview. That's why the interview is so high on everybody's list. I mean, you're going to get a good, with ACGME accreditation, if you're going to an accredited program, you're going to get a good education. But you also want to find a place that you fit in, maybe less so with the fellows as a one-year fellowship, just because they move on. But definitely a place that you sort of feel like there's a good fit and feel with the faculty and the staff. When I was applying to residency, one of the things that one of the faculty said, it's sort of like going on a blind date and you're trying to figure out if you want to go steady for the next one or however many years. And I feel like it's true on both ends, right? Like you need to decide if it's a good fit, if the program is a good fit and feel for you. And we're trying to decide, by the time you get to the interview, you are qualified. We've already vetted you through the application process. And the interview is like I said, about fit and feel. And I think that that's super important.
Awesome.
Ashwin, can I tackle one of the questions that kind of keeps coming up along the feed also about the ERAS applications and kind of where things should be fitting in? Yep. Maybe this is my beef, like Anna has a grammatical hang up here, but I feel strongly about using the first section of ERAS and the CV portion to be documenting what you actually have done. I read a lot of applications where they don't actually list any of their coverage experience or their rotation experience, but then you get a letter of recommendation from a primary care sports doc and you're like, okay, well, clearly they've rotated with this individual. I don't know when or for how long. Or likewise, they'll talk about in their personal statement coverage, which they've provided on the sidelines, but you have no documentation of what coverage they've actually done. So I feel pretty passionately about using that first section within ERAS to break up and have each rotation you've done within a relevant field documented. If you've done ortho rotations, sports med, primary care rotations, even rheumatology, musculoskeletal radiology, anything that's relevant, feel free to use one of those boxes and document that rotation, who the physicians were, who you worked with, when you worked with them, and even put a little description in the box about what your experience was during that time frame. And then you can use separate boxes to document what your actual your actual sports coverage experience has been. And this you can do in a couple different ways, and it really doesn't matter how you do it. I prefer that I don't have an individual box for every game you've attended on the sidelines. I tend to tell people to group things together. If you've worked at more than one school in a detailed amount, then list the college that you did work at in one box, and feel free to put who the attending was, who you worked with. Put a list of the coverage experiences you had or the training rooms you went to. Same with high school. There's nothing wrong with just doing a box that says high school sports coverage. And then underneath within the comments, feel free to list, I attended all the home games in the 2019 season for so-and-so high school football team, and just list what you've done. But I can't tell you how many applications, probably 30 to 40% of applications I get, I have no clear understanding of how much time people have spent in MSK rotations. And I don't have a clear understanding of how much time people have actually spent on the sidelines or in the training rooms. And as we, talked about, that's one of the most valued things that we're looking for in applications. So by all means, document it.
Perfect. Thanks. I'm going to go on to the next question to try to answer a couple more of the popular ones. This one's from Ron Rosenberg. Hi, Ron. Can you touch on what are the best ways for residents to differentiate programs when applying and trying to determine which programs are the best fit? I can take that briefly, or from my standpoint, it's reviewing what information you have. That might come from, and actually this might not be the traditional answer, but I would actually talk to a faculty member that you trust, maybe somebody that you formed a bond with. And sports medicine is a small discipline. Almost all of us know each other at some level, at the program director level, and many of us consider each other friends and mentors in some way or the other. And so we often have a good pulse of not only the programs out there, but also what a candidate may be in terms of both job or fit for a specific program. So I think that's important. The other place for me that I think is important is the website. I, like Siobhan and others and Sue's, I've put a lot of effort into developing a comprehensive website that tries to answer as many questions as might come up. And part of that's, for the applicant to truly inform them about what our program looks like, what our passion is, what our mission is, what your expectation should be, what a sample schedule should look like, what's your scholarship commitment, how often do our fellows win awards, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, it's also trying to see, okay, how deep are you going to dive to get into this program to understand if it's a fit? And it'll help inform you, but it also helps inform me if you've paid attention to those details.
I'd like to add to that, Ashwin, if I may.
Yeah.
So all of our core faculty, our 10 core faculty, including myself, plus our fellowship coordinator, talk to residents all the time about our program. People email us, people call us up. That's great. And it's a good way to learn about a program. There's some information, some good information on websites, but you can only glean so much from a website. I encourage residents to also talk to the current or recent fellows, and we ask that our fellows make themselves available to residents to talk to them, because you call me, I'm going to BS you to death about our program, but the fellows are in the trenches and they'll always give you the best, most honest information.
That's a great point.
Yep.
Okay, awesome. A couple more questions regarding sports event coverage. Do you still, quote unquote, count sports coverage that occurred during medical school? This is from James.
Sure.
I definitely do. And in fact, I would argue that is only going to underscore your interest in sports medicine. It shows me that you have thought about it for a long time. It's not just a crazy idea that popped into your mind and all of a sudden you're scrambling to go cover everything. So longevity of sports coverage is really important to me. Similarly, memberships in professional organizations, AMSSM, when did you join? Were you able to do some sort of presentation? That's amazing. That tells me so much. So yes, to me, I would certainly encourage you to put that down.
Awesome. Yeah, I would agree. For me, I'm looking for longitudinal interest as well as every other type of demonstration of gaining experience. And I don't really have much to add to what Siobhan said, other than I think it is actually beneficial to list interest that dates back.
I also really like to see a variety of interests. Like if somebody can cover a sumo wrestling match, I'm like, wow, that's amazing. That's not like the standard high school football game. So fun events, a variety of events that shows me that somebody is really trying to figure out exactly what they want to do and truly are ready to jump in.
Awesome. Well, we got another minute. How comfortable are people on the panel at staying on for a few more minutes? Is everybody okay with that?
I'm totally cool.
Okay, cool. Anna, you okay with it? Hopefully. I think she may be frozen again.
Oh, no.
Oh, no.
She's not blinking.
She is not blinking. She's that stoic. Anyway, so let me ask a few more questions. The next one that was sort of upvoted high, or what are the main, well, we sort of answered that. What are the main things interviewers value during interviews? For me, I would say that it's just having some comfort and understanding of the program and being engaged. Do other people have other comments on that?
I do. If you match into our program, I'm going to have to spend a year, maybe 2 with you. A sense of humor, a sense of wit, something interesting.
Uh-oh.
Okay, I'll pick up where Siobhan left off. Oh, I'm frozen too. Can you hear me, Ashwin?
Yes.
We can hear you.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, what would you be looking for with someone to work with for a year? So you definitely want to. It definitely has to be a good fit, both professionally, medically, and personality wise. As somebody else mentioned already, by the time you get to the interview, you've been vetted to a certain degree. So at a certain point, we're going after intangible qualities like personality, like work ethic, like communication skills, like how well you'll get along with ancillary provider, medical assistants, athletic trainers, physical therapists, things like that. So those intangible qualities are almost impossible to get from the ERAS application. We get them to a small degree, but we do try to tease that out. They're not easy to tease out, but we do try to get at that during the interview period.
Anna, any thoughts on your end? That was sort of a question regarding what's valued, what traits or things are valued during the interview process in terms of specific things you're looking for or anything like that. We've lost a couple people.
Yeah, I know. I guess it must just be my internet that keeps going in and out. So I don't know what said before, but I think that being your genuine self, both your strengths and weaknesses, sorry, sorry, it's going in and out again. I'm getting distracted. What was the question again?
It was essentially like what like the idea was sort of like how to sort of represent yourself during the interview, like that's sort of the general idea.
Yeah, so being genuine, being honest, being a hard worker. I mean, at the end of the day, to be honest with you, I'd much rather have somebody of average intelligence who is a team player and a hard worker and wants to come to our fellowship program and be their very best versus, somebody who sort of knows it all and has been there, done that. And so I think we're really looking for people, like we talked about before, people who fit in, but just people who are honest, who are genuine, and who are coming to be a team player. You don't need to be the smartest person in the world, but I want you to, really work well with others, because it's a little bit cliche, but I do think sports medicine is truly, a team endeavor, and you've got to be able to work well with a team to be successful.
If you're not being genuine, if you're not being honest, if you're trying too hard, in addition to being expert grammaticists, we're also expert psychologists, and we'll pick up on that.
Just my only other thought is, I'm also seeking how, we have different people like our program administrators, other people who are involved in the interview process, and I'm collecting data from everybody just because if any of you are treating some people great, but our program administrator poorly, I'll find out about that. And so I think that's important to know. And then the other thing is also, try to get some rest before your interview. We have had candidates show up completely like zonked off of a red eye. Granted, we are in Seattle and it's rainy and dark and all that, but if you're in the middle of your interview and you're yawning, I'm like, right across the screen. I'm sorry. I don't know why you're here, and maybe just explain it if it had been, just so I understand what's going on. So, but try to be yourself.
Our program coordinator has final power of veto.
Yep. Yes.
Agree.
Absolutely. And that's very, very important person in our process. So,
can you hear me at all, Ashwin?
You're back
I got booted off for a moment. I'm not sure if I'm being repetitive with what Stu was just commenting on, but also, kind of an insider secret, when we send you out with our fellows are making sure that your behavior is, normal and professional and appropriate. So, when you're having lunch with our fellows, it's not a time to, misbehave in a lot of ways or tell inappropriate jokes or be disrespectful to the service staff or to anybody else if you're out to lunch. Your behavior is monitored from the minute you walk through the door, or as Stu's even saying, your behavior is monitored from the minute your application's accepted, right? Because if the program coordinator dealt with you with nonstop issues or questions, or you got hounded, they do oftentimes have input into who they want to work with for the next year also.
Absolutely.
Have we addressed, I'm sorry, since I lost connection, did we address practicing the interview? Because I have interviewed internal applicants that I know really well that have bombed their interview. And it's so heartbreaking to see that an individual that you know so well not do well. And then others that you don't anticipate would do well and were wonderful interviews. So I think practicing the interview is really, really important.
Yeah, and I mean, our paper would suggest that.
Exactly.
Your interview, if anything you should be comfortable with, maybe sitting down with the faculty member who is at your program, or just practicing with somebody who you would trust to feel comfortable with, to be able to answer questions to somebody you don't necessarily know, who's clearly more, who has sort of a weight of deciding some degree if they're going to rank you or not, all that kind of stuff. That's a kind of imposing task for a lot of people. So I think practice makes perfect. I don't know how others feel about that, but that's a great point to bring up. Okay. Any red flags? That's sort of the counterpoint. I think we sort of brought this up a little bit in the context of like what we're looking for on the application day, but are there in general in applications any red flag? This was brought up by Akash.
I'd say unaccounted time. If there's, marked time off between levels of training, that's not accounted for on the application. Or, I've certainly had people who've had legal issues along the way. I want to see an explanation for that if there was legal issues. We all do stupid things when we're young. Hopefully your legal issues were far in the past. And if you're going to be honest about reporting them, at least provide us with an explanation. Yeah, I think that's super important.
I agree. I think also we talked about this earlier, failure on board scores, those need to be noted for whatever reason that they, we all understand that board scores do not equal good fellows necessarily, but you do need to pass your boards in order to be able to practice. And as was mentioned earlier, it does reflect on our accreditation. So it is something that matters to us. I think the other thing is that was touched on earlier is make sure when you're asking your letter writers to write your letter, make sure that they are willing to write you a strong letter of recommendation. I think we can probably all attest on this panel that, there's definitely code speak in letters of recommendation, and it's very clear when you don't have a strong letter of recommendation from somebody. And to me, that is one of, everything else can look great, but that is a huge red flag that somebody that you chose to speak very highly of you, sort of can't give you the highest level of recommendation, and that becomes a huge red flag. So really make sure that the people you're asking are people you know well and that know you well, and that can really give you a strong letter of recommendation, because if they don't, that can really hurt you.
Yeah. I think it's
If I ask an applicant about something, a research project they've listed on their CV, and they're not able to intelligently describe the details of that research project, that's -1 point. Not necessarily game changer, but you might go back and check your CVs and what you have on them and make sure you know actually what you did and what's on it.
So this might be a good question because a number of us are accepting candidates from multiple disciplines, and this has been upvoted a number of times. Can you talk about the differences between a PEDS-based program versus a family med, emergency med, or other program that accepts PEDS residents, with the concern that there are only 17 programs listed on ERAS as PEDS sports medicine, but a larger number of programs that accept PEDS candidates?
All right, well, I feel like this one's targeting me. I will say you have to kind of block out the noise of what's listed on ERAS under each category. We are categorized based on what we did our initial paperwork under. So for instance, I did our paperwork in 2006 for our fellowship, and we are now stuck under a PEDS heading with ACGME unless I want to start over from scratch and create a new 285-page document. And despite the fact I now have 3 family medicine attendings on board with our 3 or 4 pediatric people, I have no desire to rewrite the Bible that got us our credentialing. So you do have to kind of block out what discipline people are listed under and use the AMSSM webpage as an excellent resource for which program will accept you based on whatever your primary area of specialty is. And then I think the main thing to do is really try and dig in and figure out what your goals are down the road. If your goal is to really just see pediatric patients, then you may want to look at the more traditional pediatric-based fellowship programs. But if you want a broader perspective of sports medicine and you want exposure to adults, then considering the family medicine based programs or the ER-based programs or any other program that will look at you as a pediatrician can be very valuable, because you're still going to get pediatric experience. So then you really need to make sure that you're asking all the right questions to determine where you want to apply. And it really doesn't hurt even just to email the program directly. If you've got a huge list and you're trying to figure out where to apply, write the program director and say, hey, here are my interests. How do you think your program fits my needs versus doesn't fit my needs? Or what do you offer in terms of the PEDS adult balance? But don't let the fact that there's only 17 programs under the PEDS heading dissuade you from applying to the other programs, because there's lots of excellent family medicine-based programs that accept PEDS people. And likewise, there are lots of PEDS programs that accept family medicine-based people. We're just stuck under the PEDS heading. So you have to kind of eliminate that heading and create a list based on your own interest level.
I would fully concur with what Sue said. As a program that just last year started accepting PEDS candidates, our first class is this year, but we've had that class in years past due to funding. We are partnered strongly with Seattle Children's to create a program. Even though we're housed in the Department of Family Medicine, we want to accomplish the goals that a PEDS sports medicine program would set forth for a PEDS candidate and be no different. But that being said, we don't want to shortchange the PEDS candidate the experiences gained by the adult, or whatever, the family med candidate. So the programs are very much in echo with each other, in concert with each other. But our goal, even as a family med program that houses a PEDS track, for that to be a very PEDS friendly experience for the person in that spot.
Yeah, I think this happens in emergency medicine all the time. I think the key is that how it's listed in ERAS is just where the fellowship is housed based upon paperwork, and does not necessarily reflect the type of candidate or the specialty of candidates that programs accept. I think other things you can look at are look at the current fellows and what their primary specialty is. I think it's also a great idea, like Sue said, to email the program directors, because truthfully, it depends a lot on funding and what specialties fund the different positions. I mean, I know we would love to have a PEDS candidate here. We've tried multiple years and we just can't get the funding. It's not because we have anything against PEDS candidates. In fact, we want them, but that changes every year, which is one of the hard things I think about a year fellowship is that literally the game changes yearly. So keeping any website up to date is really challenging. So, you know, make your list. And I think especially for the folks that are in less represented fellowship programs like emergency, peds, PM&R, internal medicine, just email them directly and find out, you know, if they're accepting your specialty, what kinds of opportunities they have. Are they going to have a spot, you know, the following year?
Couple questions in terms of pros and cons of ACGME versus non-ACGME accredited fellowship. That seems to be a popular one. I have less of the capacity to just speak. I would say that as a candidate, I would strongly encourage you to pursue ACGME accredited fellowships because it allows you to sit for the boards, the CAQ.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that the non-ACGME fellowships allow you to sit for the CAQ. Mm-hmm. So you may not consider yourself a certificate of added qualification for sports medicine at the end of a non-accredited fellowship. Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, I can't think of any benefit to a non-accredited fellowship, to be honest.
You're just going to limit yourself down the road by going through a non-accredited program.
We had a candidate this year who accepted a non-accredited spot who would have been near the top of one of our lists this year, and I was very surprised that they had made the move over. But, you know, they may have felt like they were taking a gamble in other ways. But my sense was if you can pursue an accredited fellowship, that's going to be in your favor from here on forward. Sort of a generic candidate, I think, question, but it's still a good question that we've sort of answered in different ways. But what separates a great candidate from a good candidate?
I think it's a nice generic question. I'd say level of commitment that you've shown over time to the field, depth of work that you've done over time, either with coverage, rotations, both, scholarly activity. I look for people to have shown a commitment to organizations like AMSSM and attended the meeting or potentially even tried to have a case submitted and presented. And then it's all about the interview. I'm looking really for somebody to come across as a mature individual who can be a great team player and show initiative as an adult learner. And for somebody who fits in personality-wise with us.
Yeah. Similarly, somebody who, and this is harder for you guys, but somebody who I know is going to represent us well across the departments. We've worked so hard to establish such a great working relationship amongst orthopedics where, you know, on the sidelines of football, where we're co-managing and we don't want bridges burned. We want somebody who we're not going to have to crack the whip. That somebody who is self-motivated, passionate. I keep on saying the word passionate because it's something that people have that fire in them or they don't. And we want people who have that fire.
Awesome. Question that looks like it has had a few different iterations that I wanted to ask just because I thought it was different than the other questions. Do you guys value or consider either foreign medical graduates or DOs any differently than MD candidates?
Well, I've got an osteopathic track, so I definitely don't. I in some ways regret having the MD after my name. I think having a DO degree and having interest in manipulation or exposure in manipulation to be very beneficial within our field. So I'm envious of the DOs. I definitely do not view it as a negative. And in terms of foreign medical grads, I don't hold that against anybody. For me, it's all about what have you done with the opportunities you have had. As long as I can support you at the university and I don't have any issues from a visa level, then I have no problems of where you've come from, as long as you know where you're going down the road and how you want to get there.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to maybe make this the last question. Well, we'll do two more questions and then we'll sign off. Do people feel pretty good with that? Sure. There are a lot of great questions, and I apologize for any of you guys who haven't had your questions answered. It's just there's hundreds of questions, and we're trying to do our best to answer. So feel free to email me. I'm sure any of you guys, all of us would feel comfortable. Our emails are all listed on the AMSSM website. So you can find us there. My email is also on my fellowship website. as are many of ours, I believe. So feel free to reach out if you have questions, but we'll take a couple more. There was a question about advice. This is uploaded 10 times by Ben. For people who graduate to work in their primary specialty for 2 years before doing fellowship. So essentially, they work in their, I think it's sort of people who've gone out and graduated and worked and come back to it, is the question. And that's come up a couple times, and I think that's worth addressing.
We take very few fellows who are not coming straight out of residency. If there were an exceptional person, sure, we would take them. But the vast majority of folks we take, I don't know who recommended that, but I wonder why they would recommend that. It has no bearing on us.
I really value people who experience. Guys, Stuart, are you still going? I'm getting a little glitchy.
Okay, I'm here.
Okay.
So I can answer that. I was somebody who took a year off between residency and fellowship. Just 1 year, but I did take a year off. So it was something I had to answer. I was somebody who came to sports medicine later in my residency time. I was a family med candidate, and I got interested midway to kind of almost late way through my second year. My passion was initially to be a good family doc, and then to pursue sports medicine came after the fact. But my mentor at the time, Dr. Dresner and Dr. Harmon, both said, you just don't have enough to really pursue one of the top programs. And we know who you are as a person. So you may want to use your R3 year to really build up your credentials and apply off cycle. I chose to do that. I felt like that was incredibly valuable for me. May not be valuable for the person who's pursuing their program earlier in it. But if you have any concerns about whether it's the right choice for you to go to fellowship, you shouldn't probably invest in it if there's a question about it in that year, because it is a committed year where you are going to be making less money and other things. And maybe that's a message to you that you're not really fully into it. For me, it was really using that year to properly prepare myself. And I actually got to experience clinical settings outside as an attending. I came to fellowship a lot more comfortable and a lot more confident because I was managing 50 or 60 people a day in the community health center for some of that time. And I really felt like, wow, I kind of valued the care that I was giving in sports medicine even more. So for me, it worked out great. And I think that it gets maybe harder the further you're out from your residency into your fellowship. If you're 10 years out, then you really have to wonder how it was that you got there. But I know people who are now program directors at programs who did take a number of years off before coming to fellowship. So really no path is the right or wrong path from my perspective. It's as long as you have a good justification or a reason for pursuing that path.
I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, I think it's reasonable any increment of time within 3 years of completing residency. Beyond that, then you really need to start explaining why. A lot of times it's matching up with your significant other time-wise with training. But even just getting that real life experience, it actually gives you tools that help you be much more successful in fellowship. So I actually value applicants who've taken 1 or 2 years off and have worked, because then I know, 1, they're really committed to doing this, and 2, they're going to come in and having a lot of that independent decision-making skills. They're going to be able to function at a high level and move quickly and efficiently in clinic.
Awesome. Well, we have,
and they're going to bring a skill set that a new grad may not have.
Start to wrap it up. I have a few final thoughts and a couple points to share that I think are valuable. So stick around until everybody answers this one. Any other comments?
I agree.
I guess, yeah, I agree. I think that I think it also depends. I think a lot of it depends on why you've taken those years off. I think the one caution I would say is that it can be much more challenging to keep up your interest and your exposure to sports once you've become an attending and you're no longer a resident, right? You can't just go into a clinic and rotate with a sports medicine attending, for example. Now, it doesn't mean you can't do it. I'm just saying you need to be more creative about it. And if you're passionate about it and you're able to sort of show that you've got the experience and the dedication to sports medicine, people have personal lives and personal reasons for doing it. I don't think it's the wrong answer. And I agree, we don't, discriminate against people who have done it. But I do think sometimes the people who have taken some time off are not necessarily as qualified as some of the applicants who have come right out of residency, or maybe be like Ashwin, like a year out and, he sort of took the time off to, improve his application.
Awesome. Well, a couple last points. So keep in mind that we have our virtual fellowship fair later this week. I think most of us will probably be available for that to some degree, where you can explore more about the programs. A lot of us are putting little blurbs up or PowerPoints or other pieces of information about our programs. So that would be a good opportunity for each of you guys to go and explore different programs. It doesn't really matter what phase of training you're in. It's really just informational so that you guys can get to know us better. That virtual fellowship fair is occurring on the AMSSM Collaborate website. The Collaborate website's brand new. You guys probably just got an e-blast about it, something that just came up. And I think it's a very valuable resource that's attempting to build community around AMSSM. There's going to be a number of different smaller communities dedicated to various different interests within sports medicine. So take a look at that website, kind of browse around. We're starting to build it out, but the fellowship fair will be, at least in part, taking place on that website. So I wanted to give it a plug and make sure that you guys take a look. AMSSM Collaborate, it's on the main website. So, and then I also wanted to give everybody here, all of you panelists, a deep thank you. This is almost an hour and a half, actually an hour and 40-minute session now. So that's a lot of time, and I really appreciate each of you guys taking that amount of time from your families, from coronavirus coverage, from everything else that's going on in life to be here. So thank you guys. Hopefully that shows you what kind of commitment this discipline has to finding the right people for our programs. We really value our community as sports medicine. We look forward to welcoming you guys as you consider careers and move through the process. It's all it's a great community to be part of. So thank you all. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ashwin.
Awesome. Take care, everybody. Have a good one. Enjoy your training and good luck.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.